The blizzard struck without mercy, the moment Grace Vaughn realized her mare was dying beneath her. The animal's labored breathing turning to shallow gasps, as blood seeped through the snow from the wound in her side, where the mountain lion had struck 3 miles back. Grace had pushed her too hard trying to reach Alamosa before nightfall. And now here they were, stranded in the Colorado wilderness, as January 1879 unleashed its fury across the high country. She pressed her frozen hands against the mare's neck, feeling the life drain away with each fading heartbeat, and when the animal finally went still, Grace buried her face against the cooling hide and wept until her tears froze on her cheeks. The snow fell so thick, she could barely see 10 feet in any direction. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin leather gloves, and her woolen cloak, adequate for the mild winters back in Kansas where she had lived until 3 months ago, offered little protection against the biting cold of the Colorado mountains. She had been traveling to meet her uncle in Alamosa, the last living relative who might take her in after her father's death had left her alone and nearly penniless. The journey from Denver had taken longer than expected, and she had foolishly ventured into the high passes, despite warnings from the last settlement that a storm was brewing. Now her horse was dead. Her supplies were scattered across the snow where the mountain lion had spooked them, and darkness was falling fast. Grace knew enough about the wilderness to understand that staying here meant death. But moving without knowing where she was going in a blizzard seemed equally fatal. She crouched beside her dead mare, using the animal's body as a windbreak, and tried to think through the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. That was when she heard the sound of hooves crunching through snow, steady and purposeful, coming from somewhere to her left. Grace struggled to her feet, her legs stiff from cold and fear, and peered into the white curtain of falling snow. A shape emerged, large and dark, and for a moment she thought the mountain lion had returned. Then the shape resolved into a rider on horseback, leading 2 other horses behind him. The rider pulled up short when he saw her standing there beside the fallen mare. He was tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered beneath a heavy sheepskin coat, his face hidden beneath the low brim of his hat and a thick scarf wrapped around his nose and mouth against the cold. He dismounted in one fluid motion and approached her, his boots crunching in the snow. "You hurt?" His voice was rough, made gravelly by the cold, but there was genuine concern in it. Grace shook her head, not trusting her voice. Now that help had arrived, the shock of everything that had happened threatened to undo her completely. She gestured toward her mare instead. The words caught somewhere in her throat. The man knelt beside the dead horse, examining the claw marks along her flank and the pool of frozen blood beneath her. He was silent for a long moment, then stood and looked at Grace with eyes that were startlingly blue even in the failing light. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps only a few years older than her own 22 years, with a strong jaw and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. "Mountain lion," he said, and it was not a question. "You are lucky it did not come back for you." "Lucky," Grace repeated, and the word came out bitter. "My horse is dead. I am stranded in a blizzard with no way to reach town. I do not feel particularly lucky." The man unwrapped the scarf from his face, revealing features that were handsome in a rugged, unpolished way. "You are alive," he said simply. "That is more luck than many get in these mountains." He studied her for a moment, taking in her inadequate clothing and the way she shivered despite trying to hold herself still. "Where were you headed?" "Alamosa. I have an uncle there, Samuel Vaughn." "Do you know him?" The man shook his head. "I know the town. We can make it before full dark if we leave now." He walked back to his horses and began untying the lead ropes of one of the two he had been trailing. It was a beautiful mare, dappled gray with a black mane and tail, clearly well-bred and well cared for. The man led her over to where Grace stood and pressed the reins into her frozen hands. "What are you doing?" Grace asked, confused. "Giving you a horse." "You cannot walk to a limosa in this storm, and my gelding cannot carry double in this snow." "But I cannot take your horse. I have no money to pay you. When my father died, there was nothing left but debts, and I am not asking for payment." The man interrupted her gently but firmly. "This is Willow. She is the best mare I have ever owned. Sure-footed in snow, steady in a storm, and she has carried me through more trouble than I care to count. She is yours now." Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Mine, forever," the man confirmed. "A woman alone in the wilderness needs a good horse. I have others. You need her more than I do." "I cannot possibly accept such a gift from a stranger. This mare must be worth less than a life," he said, cutting her off again. "And that is what we are talking about here, your life. Now mount up before we both freeze to death having this argument." There was a finality in his tone that brooked no further protest. Grace looked at the beautiful mare, at her own dead horse lying in the snow, at the stranger who was offering her not just survival but a gift of immense value without asking anything in return. Her throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you," she managed. "I do not even know your name." "Owen." "Owen Jameson." He held out his hand, and when Grace took it, his grip was strong and warm despite the cold. "And you are Grace Vaughn." "Well, Miss Vaughn, we need to get moving. This storm is only going to get worse." Owen helped her mount Willow, adjusting the stirrups to fit her shorter legs, and then retrieved what he could salvage of her scattered supplies and secured them to his pack horse. Grace watched him work, efficient and unhurried despite the urgency of their situation. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in the wilderness, and she found herself wondering what kind of man gave away his best horse to a stranger. Once they were both mounted, Owen led the way down through the snow-covered pass, heading toward lower elevations where the storm was less fierce. Grace followed close behind, learning quickly to trust Willow's sure footing even when she could not see the trail beneath the snow. The mare moved with smooth, steady strides, her ears flicking back occasionally as if to check that her new rider was still secure in the saddle. They rode in silence for the first hour, all concentration focused on navigating the treacherous trail. The wind howled around them, driving snow into their faces and making conversation impossible. Grace's hands ached from gripping the reins, and her face felt raw from the cold, but Willow never faltered, following Owen's gelding with unwavering trust. As they descended, the storm gradually lessened, the wind dying down and the snow falling less heavily. The trail widened, and Owen dropped back to ride alongside Grace. In the gathering dusk, she could see his face more clearly now, the strong lines of his jaw and the concerned way he watched her, as if checking to make sure she was holding up. "How are you managing?" he asked. "Cold but alive. Thanks to you." Grace paused, then asked, "What were you doing out in this storm? Surely you were not just passing by at the exact moment I needed help." "I have a cabin about 5 miles back. I was checking my trap lines when I saw the tracks, yours and the cat's. I followed them to make sure you had gotten away safely." He said it matter-of-factly, as if tracking a stranger through a blizzard was just something one did on a winter afternoon. "You could have been killed. That mountain lion was huge." "Could have been," Owen agreed, "but I was not. And neither were you. That is what matters." They rode on as darkness fell completely, but Owen seemed to know the trail by instinct, guiding them confidently through the night. The moon rose nearly full, and its light reflecting off the snow made it easier to see. Grace found herself studying her unexpected rescuer, trying to understand him. He was not like the men she had known back in Kansas, the farmers and merchants and shopkeepers who made up the small town where she had grown up. There was something different about Owen Jameson, a quietness and self-sufficiency that seemed at odds with the extraordinary kindness he had shown her. "Why did you really give me this mare?" she asked finally, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "And please do not tell me it is just because I needed a horse. This animal is clearly valuable, and you do not know anything about me. I could be a horse thief for all you know." Owen was quiet for so long that Grace thought he might not answer. Then he said, 3 years ago I was caught in a flash flood down in the San Luis Valley. My horse broke his leg, and I was stranded with a broken arm and no way to get back to town. A rancher found me, gave me one of his horses, and told me to pay it forward someday. I have been waiting for the chance to do that. Today was that day. The simple honesty of his answer made Grace's chest tighten. "The rancher, did you ever repay him?" I tried. "He died the following winter. His widow would not take payment. She said the same thing he had told me, pay it forward." Owen glanced at Grace, his blue eyes steady in the moonlight. "So that is what I am doing. One day, when you are able, you will do the same for someone else." They arrived in a limosa just after midnight. The small town was largely dark, most residents already asleep, but lights still burned in the windows of the Silver Dollar Saloon and the boarding house on Main Street. Owen led her directly to the boarding house, helped her dismount, and secured both horses to the hitching rail out front. "Your uncle, Samuel Vaughn, do you know where he lives?" Owen asked as they climbed the steps to the front porch. "He has a ranch somewhere east of town, I think. The last letter I received from him was 6 months ago. He said to ask for him when I arrived, that anyone in town would know where to find him." Owen's expression changed, something flickering across his face that Grace could not quite read in the dim light. Before she could ask about it, the boarding house door opened and a plump woman in her 50s appeared, holding a lamp. "Owen Jameson, what are you doing bringing visitors at this hour?" The woman scolded, but her tone was affectionate. Then she caught sight of Grace, took in her bedraggled appearance and exhausted face, and her expression softened immediately. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in, come in. You look half frozen. Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Grace Vaughn. She ran into some trouble on the trail. She needs a room for the night, and tomorrow she will be looking for her uncle, Samuel Vaughn." Mrs. Patterson's face fell. She exchanged a glance with Owen, and Grace felt her stomach drop. Something was wrong. "What is it?" Grace demanded. "What happened to my uncle, Mrs.?" Patterson reached out and took Grace's hand, her touch gentle. "I am so sorry, dear. Samuel Vaughn passed away just over a month ago. Pneumonia took him. It was very sudden. He was buried in the town cemetery." The words hit Grace like a physical blow. She swayed on her feet, and Owen's hand came to her elbow, steadying her. Her uncle was dead. Her last living relative, her only hope for a new start, was gone. She had traveled all this way for nothing. Did he leave any property? Any instructions? Owen asked quietly, still supporting Grace's weight. "The bank took the ranch," Mrs. Patterson said sadly. "Samuel had mortgaged it heavily the year before. There was nothing left after his debts were settled. I am sorry, Miss Vaughn. I know you must have been counting on him." Grace could not speak. The events of the day, the terror of the mountain lion attack, the death of her beloved mare, the exhaustion of the journey through the blizzard, all of it came crashing down on her at once. Her vision blurred, and she felt her knees buckle. Owen caught her before she fell, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "She needs rest and warmth," he told Mrs. Patterson. Can you prepare a room, of course? Follow me. Grace wanted to protest, to insist that she could walk, but she had no strength left. She let her head rest against Owen's shoulder as he carried her up the stairs, following Mrs. Patterson to a small but clean room at the end of the hall. He laid her gently on the bed, and Mrs. Patterson immediately began removing Grace's wet boots and frozen cloak. "I will bring hot water and tea," Mrs. Patterson said. "Owen, go down and stoke the fire in the parlor. This girl needs warming from the inside out." Owen hesitated, looking down at Grace with something like concern in his eyes. "You will be all right, Miss Vaughn." Grace managed a nod, though she felt anything but all right. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He nodded once, then left, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Mrs. Patterson worked quickly, helping Grace out of her wet clothes and into a warm nightgown, then piling blankets on top of her. True to her word, she returned shortly with a pot of hot tea and a bowl of soup, coaxing Grace to eat even though she had no appetite. "What will you do now, dear?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently as Grace sipped the tea, feeling warmth slowly return to her frozen limbs. "I do not know," Grace admitted. "I have a little money, enough for a few days' lodging, but after that—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. After that, she would be homeless and alone in a strange town with winter barely begun and no prospects for work or shelter. "We will figure something out," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Alamosa is a good town. We take care of our own, and anyone Owen Jameson vouches for is as good as family. You rest now. Things always look better in the morning." But as Grace lay in the dark after Mrs. Patterson left, listening to the wind rattle the windows, she could not imagine how things could possibly look better. She had lost everything. Her father, her home, her mare, her last living relative, any hope for a future. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent and bitter, until exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. She woke to pale morning sunlight streaming through the curtains, and the smell of coffee and bacon wafting up from downstairs. For a moment, she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back, and the weight of her situation settled over her like a physical thing. There was a soft knock on the door, and Mrs. Patterson entered with a tray. "Good morning, dear. I thought you might like breakfast in bed after yesterday." Grace sat up, accepting the tray gratefully. Her body ached from the hard ride and the cold, but the worst of her exhaustion had passed. "Thank you, you have been very kind." "Nonsense. It is the least I can do." Mrs. Patterson busied herself opening the curtains wider, letting in more light. "Owen stopped by earlier. He brought your things from his pack horse, what he could salvage from your supplies. He also left this." She handed Grace an envelope. Inside was a short note written in a strong, angular hand. "Miss Vaughn, please come to the ranch when you are feeling recovered. There is something I would like to discuss with you that may be of benefit to us both. Owen Jameson. Directions are on the back." Grace turned the paper over and found simple directions to a ranch about 3 miles outside of town. "What is this about?" she asked Mrs. Patterson. The older woman shook her head. Owen did not say, but he looked very serious. "I have known that boy since he came to this valley 5 years ago, and I have never seen him more determined about something. If I were you, I would go see what he has to say. Owen is a good man, one of the best. If he says he has something that might help you, I would trust that." After breakfast, Grace dressed in her one other dress, a simple blue wool that had survived her scattered supplies relatively undamaged, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Patterson had Willow already saddled and waiting out front, and Grace felt a surge of gratitude toward Owen all over again. The mare nickered softly when she saw Grace, and Grace stroked her neck. marveling at the fact that this beautiful animal was now hers. The ride to Owen's ranch was easy in the daylight, following a well-maintained road that ran east from town along the base of the mountains. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed into pristine white, the sun glinting off snow-covered fields and distant peaks. Despite her troubles, Grace found herself appreciating the stark beauty of this high valley, so different from the flat prairies of Kansas. Owen's ranch was larger than she had expected. A well-built log house with a barn and several outbuildings, all situated in a sheltered valley with access to a creek that ran down from the mountains. Cattle grazed in a nearby pasture, dark shapes against the white snow, and smoke rose from the chimney of the house. It was a prosperous-looking operation, the kind that took years of hard work to build. Owen emerged from the barn as she rode up, wiping his hands on a rag. He had cleaned up since the night before, his face freshly shaved and his dark hair still damp from washing. In the clear morning light, Grace could see him more clearly than she had before, and she found herself struck by how handsome he was, in a rough, unpretentious way. "Miss Vaughn, thank you for coming." He helped her dismount and led Willow to the barn, where he unsaddled her and put her in a stall with hay and water. Grace followed, curious about what he wanted to discuss. "Your note said you had something to talk to me about," she prompted when he did not immediately speak. Owen closed the stall door and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I have a proposition for you. I want you to hear me out before you respond." Grace nodded, intrigued and a little apprehensive. "This ranch is doing well," Owen began, gesturing around him. "I have built it up over the past 5 years, and I am starting to expand into horse breeding. The problem is, I am just one man. I need help, but I cannot afford to hire hands year-round. I have been managing on my own, but it is becoming too much, especially in winter when the work does not let up." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I know you are in a difficult situation. No family, no home, limited funds. What I am proposing is a business arrangement. You stay here and help me run the ranch. In exchange, you get room and board, a share of the profits and security. It would be completely respectable. You would have your own room, and Mrs. Patterson or one of the other town ladies would come by regularly as a chaperone. After a year, if things work out, we could formalize the partnership legally." Grace stared at him, trying to process what he was offering. "You want me to work for you, with me," Owen corrected. "As a partner. I need someone I can trust, someone who is not afraid of hard work. I saw how you handled yourself yesterday. You did not panic even when things were at their worst. That tells me you have the kind of strength this life requires." "But you do not know anything about me," Grace protested. "I could be completely incompetent at ranch work. I grew up in a small town. My father was a shopkeeper. I know nothing about cattle or horses beyond basic riding." "I can teach you that," Owen said. "What I cannot teach is character. You have that. The rest is just skills." Grace turned away, walking to the barn door and looking out at the snow-covered valley. It was a generous offer, far more than she had any right to expect from a stranger. But she could not shake the feeling that there had to be more to it. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked, not looking at him. "Yesterday you gave me your best mare. Today you are offering me a home and a livelihood. People do not do things like this without reason." "What do you want from me, Mr. Jameson?" She heard him move closer, his boots scuffing on the barn floor. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. "I watched my mother struggle after my father died when I was 15. She had no skills, no property, no one to help her. She remarried within 6 months because she had no other choice, and the man she married made both our lives hell for the next 3 years until I was old enough to leave. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would help women in situations like hers, like yours. I have the means now. And you need help. It is as simple as that. Grace turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She saw only sincerity and a hint of old pain. "Is your mother still alive?" she asked gently. "No, she died 2 years after I left. Her husband worked her to death." The words were flat, emotionless, but Grace could hear the grief beneath them. "I am sorry." Owen shrugged. "It was a long time ago, but it taught me something about how hard life can be for women alone. I do not want to see you end up like her, desperate enough to make bad choices just to survive." Grace considered his words, turning the offer over in her mind. It was unconventional, certainly. People would talk, but what were her alternatives? She could try to find work in town, but positions for single women were scarce and poorly paid. She could attempt to travel to another city, but she had barely enough money for a week's lodging, let alone passage somewhere else. And winter in the Colorado mountains was not the time to be wandering without resources. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I want to be clear about expectations. I will work hard and I will learn everything you can teach me. But I will not be treated as a servant or anything less than the partner you say you are offering. And if either of us decides this arrangement is not working, I want the freedom to leave without obligation." "Agreed," Owen said immediately. "And the same goes for me. If I find I cannot keep my end of the bargain, I will give you enough money to get you to Denver or wherever you want to go, and I will help you find a position there." He held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Grace looked at his hand, calloused and strong, the hand that had pulled her back from the edge of death and offered her a future when she had none. She thought about her father, who had always told her to trust her instincts. Her instincts said that Owen Jameson was a good man, one of the rare ones who actually meant what he said. She took his hand and shook it firmly. "We have a deal." The smile that broke across Owen's face transformed him, chasing away the seriousness and revealing a warmth that made him seem younger. "Good. I am glad. Let me show you the house and get you settled in." The house was comfortable and well-maintained, with a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area, 2 bedrooms, and a loft that Owen said he would convert into proper sleeping quarters for himself, so Grace could have one of the bedrooms. It was clear that a man lived here alone, everything functional but lacking the small touches that made a house a home, but it was clean and solid with good bones. "I built most of it myself," Owen said as he showed her around. "There is still work to be done. I want to add on another room or two, and the barn needs expansion if I am serious about horse breeding, but it is a start." "It is a good start," Grace said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you have built here." Over the next few days, Grace settled into life at the ranch. Owen was a patient teacher, showing her how to care for the cattle, how to recognize signs of illness or injury, how to manage feed and water in winter conditions. She learned to split wood, to maintain the equipment, to read the weather signs that might signal another storm. It was hard, physical work, and she fell into bed exhausted every night, but there was a satisfaction in it that she had never experienced in her old life. True to his word, Owen maintained complete propriety. He moved his things up to the loft, giving her the larger bedroom on the ground floor. Mrs. Patterson came by twice a week, ostensibly to bring supplies but really to check on Grace and make sure everything was above board. The older woman seemed satisfied with the arrangement, and she helped Grace spread the word in town that Owen had hired her as a ranch partner, which seemed to satisfy most people's curiosity. As January turned to February, Grace found herself growing more comfortable, not just with the work but with Owen himself. He was quiet by nature, not given to unnecessary talk, but when he did speak, it was always worth listening to. He had a dry sense of humor that surprised her, and a kindness that extended not just to her, but to everything around him. She watched the way he cared for his animals, gentle and patient even with the most difficult cattle, and the way he treated the few neighbors who stopped by with respect and genuine interest. She also could not help noticing other things about him. The way his shoulders moved under his shirt when he worked, the concentration on his face when he was training a young horse, the rare, brilliant smile that appeared when something pleased him. She told herself it was just natural to appreciate a man who had shown her such kindness, but she knew she was lying to herself. One evening in late February, they were sitting by the fire after supper, Grace mending a torn shirt and Owen working on repairing a bridle. A comfortable silence had settled over them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. "Can I ask you something?" Grace said, breaking the quiet. "Of course." "That mare, Willow, you said she was the best you ever owned. Do you regret giving her to me?" Owen looked up from the bridle, his blue eyes thoughtful in the firelight. "No, not for a moment. Why not? She must have meant a lot to you." "She did," Owen agreed. "I raised her from a foal, trained her myself. She saved my life more than once." He paused, then added quietly, "But some things matter more than a horse, no matter how good she is. Your life mattered more. And watching you with her these past weeks, seeing how you have bonded with her, that has been worth more to me than keeping her for myself." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks and bent her head over her mending to hide it. "You are a good man, Owen Jameson. I am just a man trying to do right by people, same as anyone should. Not everyone does, though. Most people would have ridden past, told themselves it was not their problem." "Then most people are cowards." Owen's voice was firm. "When you have the power to help someone and you do not, you are responsible for what happens to them. I could not have lived with myself if I had left you there." They fell silent again, but it was a different silence now, charged with things unsaid. Grace found herself watching Owen more than her mending, studying the strong lines of his profile, the capable movements of his hands. She wondered what he was thinking, whether he felt any of this strange pull that seemed to draw her toward him more every day. As if sensing her gaze, Owen looked up and their eyes met. Something passed between them, something electric and undeniable. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Owen cleared his throat and looked away back to his bridle. "Getting late," he said, his voice slightly rough. "We should probably turn in. Early start tomorrow." Grace nodded, gathering up her mending with hands that trembled slightly. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Grace." She lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the sound of Owen moving around in the loft above her, trying to understand what was happening to her. She had known him less than 2 months, and yet she felt closer to him than she had to anyone in her life. He had saved her, given her a home, treated her with respect and kindness. And somewhere along the way, gratitude had transformed into something deeper and more complicated. March brought warmer weather and the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown grass beneath and turning the roads to mud. Owen began preparations for calving season, and Grace threw herself into learning everything she could about the process. She was determined to prove her worth, to show Owen that his faith in her had not been misplaced. One afternoon, she was in the barn checking on a cow that seemed close to labor when Owen came in with a young horse on a lead line. It was one of the yearlings he had bred, a beautiful chestnut colt with a white blaze and intelligent eyes. "This is Firefly," Owen said, bringing the colt over. "I am starting his training today. Want to watch?" Grace nodded eagerly. She had been fascinated by Owen's approach to horse training, which was based on patience and trust rather than force. She followed him out to the corral and watched as he began working with the colt, his movements slow and deliberate, his voice soft and constant. "The key is to make them want to cooperate," he explained as he worked. "If you use force, you might get compliance, but you will never get partnership. A horse that trusts you will try harder, go farther, and stay loyal even in the worst circumstances." "Is that how you trained Willow?" Grace asked. Yes, she was a difficult foal, too smart for her own good and stubborn as they come. But once she understood that I was not going to hurt her, that I respected her spirit, she became the best partner I could have asked for. He glanced at Grace, a slight smile on his face. "Kind of like someone else I know." Grace felt her heart skip a beat. "Am I stubborn?" "As they come," Owen confirmed, but his tone was affectionate. "But you are also smart and brave and willing to learn. Those are the qualities that matter." They worked together in the corral for another hour, Grace helping to hold the colt while Owen introduced him to the saddle blanket, and then gradually to the weight of the saddle itself. The colt was nervous but responded well to Owen's calm confidence, and by the end of the session, he was standing quietly with the saddle on his back, accepting treats from both of them. "You have a gift for this," Grace said, as they unsaddled the colt and turned him back into the pasture. "Have you ever thought about focusing entirely on horse breeding and training? You could build a real reputation." "I have thought about it," Owen admitted. "That is part of why I wanted a partner. The cattle provide steady income, but horses are my passion. If I had someone to help manage the ranch, I could spend more time developing the breeding program." "Then that is what we should do," Grace said decisively. "I can handle more of the daily management. I have learned enough now to take over most of the routine work." "You should focus on what you do best." Owen looked at her, something warm and appreciative in his eyes. "You really mean that?" "Of course I do. We are partners, are we not? Partners help each other pursue their goals." "We are partners," Owen agreed quietly. "Though I confess I have been thinking lately that perhaps—" He trailed off and Grace felt her pulse quicken. "Perhaps what?" Owen shook his head as if thinking better of what he had been about to say. "Nothing. We should head back to the house. We have an early start tomorrow." But that night, as Grace lay in bed, she could not stop thinking about his unfinished sentence. What had he been about to say? The question kept her awake long into the night, hope and uncertainty warring in her chest. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Calving season was in full swing, which meant long days and nights checking on the cows, assisting with difficult births, and making sure the newborn calves stayed healthy. Grace threw herself into the work, and Owen worked beside her, both of them too exhausted by the end of each day to do much more than eat and collapse into bed. But through the exhaustion, Grace felt a deep contentment. She was good at this work, and she knew it. Owen trusted her judgment, often deferring to her instincts when it came to the cattle. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs, moving around each other with an easy familiarity that felt natural and right. One night, they were in the barn dealing with a difficult birth. The cow had been in labor for hours, and it was clear the calf was positioned wrong. Owen had his arm inside the cow trying to turn the calf, his face tight with concentration. "There," he said finally. "I have got it. Grace, be ready to pull when I tell you." Grace positioned herself, grasping the calf's legs as they emerged. "Ready." Now, together they pulled, and the calf slid out in a rush of fluid. It lay still for a moment, and Grace's heart sank, but then Owen cleared the membrane from its face and rubbed it vigorously with straw. The calf coughed, shuddered, and then drew its first breath. "We did it," Grace said, relief flooding through her. She looked up at Owen, who was grinning despite being covered in blood and birth fluids. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him in a spontaneous hug. Owen went still for a moment, then his arms came up around her, holding her close. Grace became suddenly, intensely aware of the warmth of his body, the strength in his arms, the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. She pulled back slightly, meaning to step away, but Owen's hands did not drop. Instead, they moved to frame her face, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, his eyes searching hers in the dim lantern light. "Grace," he said, his voice rough with something that might have been longing. "I need to tell you something." "What?" she whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "These past months with you have been the best of my life. You are not just a partner to me, not anymore. You have become so much more than that. I think about you constantly. I worry about you. I want to protect you and support you and see you smile. I know this is not what we agreed to, and I know I should not be saying this, but I cannot keep it to myself any longer. I am falling in love with you, Grace Vaughn. I might already be completely in love with you." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, dreamed even, but hearing the words spoken aloud was overwhelming. "Owen, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know this complicates things. If you do not feel the same way, we can forget I said anything and go back to being partners. I will not make things awkward or uncomfortable for you. I promise." "Owen, stop talking," Grace said, and then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Owen froze in surprise. Then he responded with a hunger that took her breath away. His arms wrapping around her and pulling her close, his mouth claiming hers with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. Grace melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, pouring all her own confused emotions into the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Does that mean?" he started. "It means I feel the same way," Grace said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, but I was afraid to say anything. I thought maybe you were just being kind, that you could never see me as anything more than a charity case you took in." "A charity case?" Owen pulled back to look at her incredulously. "Grace, you are the strongest, most capable woman I have ever met. You took a desperate situation and turned it into opportunity. You learned everything I taught you and then started teaching me things. You are not a charity case. You are a miracle." Tears pricked Grace's eyes. "You saved my life that day in the snow. I would have died without you." "And you saved mine," Owen said softly. "I just did not realize I was dying until you arrived. I was just existing, going through the motions, building this ranch for no real reason except that it gave me something to do. You gave me purpose. You gave me hope. You gave me something worth fighting for beyond just survival." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment. Around them, the mother cow lowed softly, and the calf struggled to its feet on shaky legs, but neither of them paid attention. They were lost in each other, in the wonder of discovering that the feelings they had been fighting were mutual and real. Finally, reluctantly, Owen pulled away. "We should take care of the cow and calf, make sure they are both doing all right." Grace laughed, a little giddy with happiness. "Yes, we probably should." They worked together to ensure the cow was recovering well and the calf was nursing properly. Then they cleaned up and walked back to the house together, their hands intertwined. The night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead, and Grace felt as if she were floating. Inside, Owen banked the fire and lit a lamp while Grace put water on for tea. There was a nervous energy between them now, an awareness that everything had changed. "What happens now?" Grace asked, sitting at the table. Owen sat across from her, taking her hands in his. "That depends on you. What do you want to happen?" Grace took a breath, gathering her courage. "I want to stay here with you." Not as a partner, or not just as a partner. I want to build a life with you, Owen. I want to help you breed horses and raise cattle and make this ranch into something extraordinary. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep in your arms. I want everything." "Then you shall have it," Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of it. I want to marry you, Grace. I know it is fast and maybe people will say we are rushing, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Grace said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen came around the table and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other as the reality of their commitment settled over them like a blessing. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Alamosa, with Mrs. Patterson and her husband serving as witnesses. Grace wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, pale green with cream lace, and Owen wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed her with such joy that the small congregation laughed and applauded. The wedding dinner was held at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, with half the town turning out to celebrate. People who had been wary of the unconventional arrangement between Grace and Owen now seemed happy to accept their marriage, and Grace found herself welcomed into the community in a way she had not expected. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, now as husband and wife, Grace felt a peace she had not known since before her father's death. Everything that had seemed like a tragedy, losing her horse in the snow, discovering her uncle had died, finding herself alone and without resources, all of it had led her to this moment, to this man, to this life. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked as they rode side by side through the gathering dusk. "I am thinking that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things we never knew we needed," Grace said. "If my mare had not died, if you had not found me, if my uncle had still been alive, I would never have ended up here with you. I would have lived a completely different life." "Do you regret that?" Owen asked quietly. "Not for a second," Grace said firmly. "This is exactly where I am supposed to be." Owen reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. "I love you, Grace Jameson." Grace felt her heart expand at the sound of her new name. "I love you too, Owen, with everything I am." They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, which Owen had prepared with surprising thoughtfulness. He had cleaned everything until it shone, had put fresh linens on the bed, and had even managed to find wildflowers somewhere to put in a jar on the table. Grace was touched by the effort, by the evidence that this quiet, practical man had a romantic side he rarely showed. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the emotional bond they had been building for months. Owen was gentle with her, attentive to her needs, making sure she felt cherished and desired. And Grace gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, trusting him with her body as she had come to trust him with her heart. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed, skin to skin, listening to the night sounds outside. Grace traced idle patterns on Owen's chest, marveling at the fact that this strong, kind man was now her husband. "Tell me about your plans for the horse breeding program," she said sleepily. "I want to know everything you dream about for this place." Owen's arm tightened around her. "You really want to know?" "Of course I do. Your dreams are my dreams now." So Owen talked, his voice low and rumbling in the darkness, about his vision for breeding horses that combined strength and intelligence, animals that could thrive in the harsh Colorado environment while also being beautiful and spirited. He talked about expanding the barn, about buying better breeding stock, about eventually developing a reputation that would draw buyers from across the territory. Grace listened, asking questions, offering suggestions, and as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought that this was what happiness felt like. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of someone to share both the burdens and the joys. The months that followed their marriage were busy but deeply satisfying. Grace took over more of the daily ranch management, freeing Owen to focus on the horses. They worked together to expand the operation, taking on a hired hand in the summer to help with the heaviest work. The young man, barely 18, was eager to learn and took lodging in the barn, giving Owen and Grace their privacy in the house. By autumn, Owen's horses were beginning to develop a reputation. He sold 3 yearlings for excellent prices, and word spread about the quality of his breeding program. More buyers came to look at his stock, and several placed orders for future foals. The ranch was not just surviving, it was thriving. In October, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be certain before telling Owen. When she finally shared the news with him one evening after supper, he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Grace asked, though his reaction made the question unnecessary. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Owen said, setting her down gently and placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "You have given me everything I never knew I wanted, Grace. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every single day." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You saved my life. You gave me your best mare and said she was mine forever. You offered me a future when I had none. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You have given me just as much as I have given you." They held each other in the fading light, already imagining the child who would join them in the spring, planning for a future that seemed bright and full of promise. The winter was milder than the previous year, which was fortunate given Grace's pregnancy. She continued to work on the ranch as long as she was able, but as she grew larger, Owen became increasingly protective, insisting she rest and let him handle the heavier tasks. Grace chafed at being coddled but also found his concern endearing. Mrs. Patterson visited regularly, bringing supplies and advice about pregnancy and childbirth. She had raised 4 children of her own and was a wealth of practical knowledge. She also brought baby clothes and blankets, gifts from the women of the town who had embraced Grace as one of their own. In April, during a warm spell that brought early wildflowers blooming across the valley, Grace went into labor. Owen was beside himself with worry, pacing the house while Mrs. Patterson and the town midwife attended to Grace. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day, but finally, as the sun was setting, a baby's cry filled the house. Owen burst into the bedroom, his face pale with exhaustion and anxiety. Mrs. Patterson met him at the door, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is tired but well." Owen pushed past her to Grace's side. She was propped up in bed, her hair damp with sweat and her face drawn with exhaustion, but she was smiling as she held a tiny bundle in her arms. Owen knelt beside the bed, his eyes fixed on his wife and child. "Grace," he breathed. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she assured him. "Look at him, Owen. Look at our son." She pulled back the blanket so Owen could see the baby's face. He was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. Owen reached out with one finger to touch the baby's cheek, his hand trembling. "He is beautiful," Owen whispered. "He is perfect. What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Owen said, "Henry, after my father. He was a good man, and I hope our boy grows up to be like him." Henry Jameson, Grace said, testing the name. I like it. Welcome to the world, Henry. The baby stirred at the sound of her voice and opened his eyes, gazing up at his parents with unfocused newborn vision. Owen felt something shift in his chest, a love so fierce and immediate that it took his breath away. This was his son, his child, the physical manifestation of his love for Grace. He would protect him, provide for him, raise him to be strong and kind and good. "Thank you," he said to Grace, taking her hand and pressing it to his lips. "Thank you for this gift. Thank you for everything." The years that followed were full and rich. Henry grew into a sturdy, bright child who adored both his parents and the ranch. By the time he was 3, he was already helping his father with the horses in his own small way, fearless and curious about everything. Grace managed the ranch with skill and confidence, her initial inexperience long forgotten. She kept the books, negotiated with buyers, and made decisions about breeding and selling with an expertise that earned respect throughout the valley. Owen focused on training and building the reputation of their horses, which became some of the most sought after in Colorado. In 1883, Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth, a sweet-natured child with her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. And 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel after Grace's uncle, the man whose death had indirectly brought her to Alamosa and to Owen. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, with additional rooms and a larger kitchen. Owen built a proper bunkhouse for the ranch hands they now employed full-time, and a new, larger barn to house the expanding horse breeding operation. The cattle herd remained steady, providing reliable income, but horses were the heart of the ranch, Owen's passion, and the thing that set the Jameson Ranch apart from others in the valley. Through it all, Grace and Owen's love for each other only deepened. They had the kind of partnership that came from shared hardship and triumph, from working together toward common goals, from choosing each other every single day. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, talking late into the night after the children were asleep, keeping the romance alive even as their lives became busier and more complicated. One evening in late 1887, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, Grace leaned against Owen's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You remember that day in the snow?" she asked. "When my mare died and I thought my life was over." "I remember," Owen said, his arm coming around her. "You were the bravest thing I had ever seen, standing there in the blizzard, refusing to give up even though you had every reason to." "I was terrified," Grace admitted. "I thought I was going to die. And then you appeared, like something out of a dream, and gave me Willow. I still do not understand what made you do that." Owen was quiet for a moment, gazing out at the mountains. "I think some people come into our lives at exactly the moment we need them, and we into theirs. I needed you just as much as you needed me that day. I just did not know it yet." "I have been thinking," Grace said. "Willow is getting older. She has been such a good horse, so faithful. I want Henry to have her when he is old enough to handle her on his own. I want him to understand what she represents, the kindness and generosity that started all of this." "That is a good idea," Owen agreed. "He should know the story, know that everything we have built came from a single act of compassion in a snowstorm. And maybe someday he will do the same for someone else," Grace added. "Pay it forward like you did." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard. Henry was showing Ruth how to braid a rope, demonstrating with patient seriousness, while baby Samuel toddled around chasing chickens. It was an ordinary evening, nothing special, but Grace felt a profound gratitude for this life, for this family, for the man beside her who had seen her at her lowest and offered her not just help but love. "I love you," she said, turning to kiss Owen's cheek. "More than I can ever adequately express." "I love you too," Owen replied, pulling her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Jameson. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would not change a single thing." As the sun sank below the mountains and the first stars appeared, they remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together and the love that had grown from a desperate moment in a snowstorm to a lifetime of happiness. The ranch continued to prosper through the late 1880s and into the 1890s. Henry grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's gift with horses, while Ruth developed a head for business that reminded everyone of her mother. Young Samuel was still finding his way, alternating between wanting to be exactly like his older brother and forging his own path. In 1892, Grace and Owen celebrated their 14th wedding anniversary with a party at the ranch, inviting neighbors and friends from throughout the valley. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s but still spry, presided over the festivities like a benevolent aunt, telling anyone who would listen about the day she had first met Grace, half frozen and heartbroken, and how she had known immediately that the girl was something special. As Grace moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and catching up with friends, she felt Owen's eyes on her from across the yard. She looked up and met his gaze, and the warmth in his expression made her heart flutter just as it had when they were newlyweds. After all these years, after all the trials and triumphs they had faced together, he could still make her feel like the most important person in the world with just a look. Later, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, they walked out to the barn together to check on a mare who was due to foal any day. The barn was quiet except for the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls, and moonlight streamed through the windows, creating pools of silver light on the floor. Owen took Grace's hand and led her to Willow's stall. The mare was 20 years old now, retired from riding but still healthy and content. She nickered softly when she saw them, coming to the stall door for treats and attention. "You remember the first time I saw her?" Grace asked, stroking Willow's soft nose. "I thought she was the most beautiful horse I had ever seen. I still think so." "She has been a good horse," Owen agreed. "Faithful and true, just like her owner," Grace laughed. "Are you calling me a horse?" "I am calling you faithful and true," Owen corrected, pulling her into his arms. "And beautiful and brave, and everything I could ever want in a wife." They kissed in the moonlit barn, with Willow watching benevolently and the other horses settling in for the night. It was a moment of peace and perfect contentment, the kind of moment that Grace had learned to treasure over the years. "Thank you," Grace whispered against Owen's chest. "For what?" "For that day in the snow. For seeing me when I was lost and offering me not just survival but a life. For loving me, for giving me all of this." She gestured around the barn, but she meant so much more than the physical structure. She meant the ranch, the children, the life they had built together from nothing. "You gave me just as much," Owen insisted. "More even. You took a lonely man with a half-built dream and turned it into a reality beyond anything I could have imagined." "We did it together," Grace said firmly. "That is the point. Neither of us could have done this alone. We needed each other." "We still need each other," Owen replied. "And we always will." They remained in the barn for a while longer, talking quietly about their plans for the coming year, about Henry's increasing skill with the horses, about Ruth's idea to start breeding sheep as well as cattle, about Samuel's announcement that he wanted to be a veterinarian. They talked about their hopes and dreams, just as they had on their wedding night. But now, Those hopes and dreams were tempered with experience and enriched by years of working toward them together. When they finally returned to the house, Grace paused at the door to look back at the barn, the pastures, the mountains rising dark against the starlit sky. This was home, not just a place, but a feeling of belonging, of being exactly where she was meant to be. Owen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "About how far we have come," Grace said. "About how a single moment can change the entire course of a life. If you had not been checking your trap lines that day, if you had decided the storm was too dangerous to investigate those tracks, if you had been just an hour earlier or later. But I was exactly where I needed to be, exactly when I needed to be there," Owen interrupted gently. "And so were you." "I do not believe in coincidence anymore, Grace. I think we were meant to find each other in that snowstorm. I think your mare died so that you would be there, so that I would have the chance to help you, so that our lives would intersect in a way that changed everything." "Do you really believe that?" Grace asked, turning in his arms to face him. "I do," Owen said seriously. "I have thought about it a lot over the years, all the little things that had to happen for us to be in that exact place at that exact time. It seems like more than just chance." Grace considered his words, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you are right. Maybe everything happens for a reason, even the hard things, even the losses. Maybe my father's death and my uncle's death and losing my mare were all part of a path that led me here to you, to this life. And maybe my mother's suffering and my years of building this ranch alone were leading me to the moment when I would find you," Owen added. "Maybe all of it mattered, all of it meant something." They stood together in the doorway, wrapped in each other's arms, contemplating the mysterious ways that life unfolded, the way that tragedy and triumph were often intertwined, the way that the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes if you were brave enough to keep going. Over the next several years, the Jameson family continued to flourish. Henry, at 19, took over most of the horse training, working alongside his father but also developing his own techniques and approaches. Ruth, at 16, was managing the business side of the ranch with a skill that impressed even the hardened cattle buyers who came through. And Samuel, at 14, had indeed decided to pursue veterinary medicine, apprenticing with the local veterinarian when he was not needed on the ranch. In 1896, Henry met a young woman named Catherine Morris at a horse auction in Denver. She was the daughter of a prominent rancher and shared Henry's passion for horses. Owen and Grace watched with knowing smiles as their son fell in love, remembering their own courtship. Henry and Catherine were married the following spring, and Catherine moved to the ranch, where she quickly became an invaluable addition to the family business. Ruth was courted by several young men from the valley, but she was in no hurry to marry, content to focus on the ranch and her own ambitions. Grace supported her decision, remembering how she had once faced a world that offered women few choices. Ruth had choices, and Grace was determined that her daughter would exercise them on her own terms. Samuel left for veterinary school in the fall of 1898, the first member of the family to pursue formal education beyond the basic schooling available in Alamosa. Owen and Grace were immensely proud, even as they missed his presence on the ranch. As the 19th century drew to a close, Grace found herself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought her to this point. She was 41 years old, still strong and capable, but beginning to feel the effects of years of hard physical work. Owen, at 44, had a few threads of gray in his hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still the strong, capable man who had rescued her in the snow all those years ago. One winter afternoon in December 1899, Grace was in the barn checking on the horses when she heard Henry calling her name urgently. She hurried out to find him standing in the paddock with Catherine, both of them looking worried. "What is wrong?" Grace asked. "It is Willow," Henry said. "She went down this morning and will not get up. Father is with her now." Grace's heart clenched. Willow was 22 years old, an impressive age for a horse, but Grace had been dreading this moment for the past few years. She followed Henry and Catherine to the far paddock, where Owen was kneeling in the snow beside the old mare. Willow was lying on her side, her breathing labored. Owen looked up as Grace approached, and the sorrow in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. "How long does she have?" Grace asked, kneeling beside him. "Not long. A few hours, maybe less. I have made her as comfortable as I can." Owen's voice was rough with emotion. Willow had been his companion for many years before Grace arrived, and saying goodbye was clearly difficult for him. Grace stroked Willow's neck, feeling the mare's warmth beneath her hand. "Thank you," she whispered to the horse. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for carrying me safely all those times. Thank you for being such a good friend." Willow's eyes opened, and she seemed to look directly at Grace, as if she understood. Then her eyes closed again, and her breathing slowed. Owen put his arm around Grace, and they sat together in the snow as the afternoon light faded, keeping vigil over the mare who had brought them together. Henry and Catherine stood nearby, silent and respectful, understanding that this was a significant moment. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Willow drew one last breath and was still. Grace felt tears stream down her face, not just for the loss of the horse but for everything Willow represented. A desperate moment in a snowstorm, an act of incredible kindness, the beginning of a love story that had changed her entire life. "She had a good life," Owen said quietly. "She was loved and valued until the very end. Not every horse can say that." "She gave me everything," Grace replied, her voice thick with tears. "Without her, I would not have you or the children or this life. I owe her more than I can ever repay." "You repaid her by loving her and caring for her all these years," Owen assured her. "She knew she was cherished. I could see it in the way she looked at you." They buried Willow on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where wildflowers bloomed in the spring and the view stretched for miles. Owen carved a simple marker: "Willow, faithful friend and the beginning of our story." Henry and Catherine helped dig the grave, and Samuel came home from school for the burial, the whole family gathering to say goodbye to the mare who had played such a crucial role in their history. As they stood around the grave, Grace spoke, her voice steady despite her grief. "Owen gave me this mare when I had nothing, when my life seemed over and I saw no path forward. She carried me safely, became my friend, and in doing so, gave me time to fall in love with the man who would become my husband. Everything we have, everything we are as a family, started with an act of kindness in a snowstorm and a mare named Willow. I want all of you to remember that. Remember that kindness matters, that generosity can change lives, that sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best destinations." She looked around at her family, at Owen standing beside her with silver in his hair but the same warm love in his eyes, at Henry and Catherine holding hands, at Ruth standing tall and independent, at Samuel, who had come home to honor a horse he had barely known but whose impact on his existence was undeniable. "We will remember," Henry said quietly, and the others nodded in agreement. After the burial, the family returned to the house for a quiet dinner. Stories were shared about Willow, funny moments and touching ones, memories that would keep her alive in their hearts even though she was gone. Grace found comfort in the presence of her family. in the solid permanence of the life she and Owen had built together. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Grace and Owen sat together in the living room, the fire burning low, wrapped in a quilt and in each other's arms. "I never thanked you properly," Grace said softly. "For giving me Willow. I thanked you at the time, but I do not think I truly understood what you were giving me." "I gave you a horse," Owen said simply. "No," Grace corrected. "You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me the means to survive, but more than that, you gave me the first sign that there were still good people in the world, that not everything was loss and grief. You gave me a reason to keep going. And in the process, you gave me everything else: love, family, a home, a purpose. All of that started with Willow." Owen tightened his arms around her. "Then I am glad I listened to my instincts that day. When I saw you standing there in the snow, something told me that you were important, that you mattered. I am grateful I paid attention to that feeling." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not found me?" Grace asked. "Sometimes," Owen admitted. "But then I stop myself because I do not want to imagine a life without you in it. These have been the best years of my life, Grace. Every single day with you has been a gift." "Even the hard days," Grace teased gently. "Especially the hard days," Owen replied seriously. "Because those are the days when I learned what we are really made of, when I saw how strong you are, how determined, how unwilling to give up. Those days taught me that I chose the right partner, someone who would stand beside me through anything." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire and listening to the wind outside. It was the kind of comfortable quiet that only came from years of being together, of knowing each other so completely that words were often unnecessary. "I love you," Grace said eventually. "More now than I did on our wedding day, which I would not have thought possible." "Love grows," Owen replied. "If you tend it properly, if you nurture it and protect it, it grows deeper and stronger with every passing year. Ours has certainly done that." "Do you think Henry and Catherine will have what we have?" Grace asked, thinking of their oldest son and his new wife. "I hope so," Owen said. "They have a good foundation. They respect each other, they share common interests, and they are not afraid of hard work. That is a solid start. The rest will depend on how they handle the challenges that come their way." "Ruth worries me sometimes," Grace confessed. "She is so independent, so determined to do everything herself. I'm afraid she will never let anyone close enough to love her." "She is your daughter," Owen pointed out with a smile. "She has your strength and your independence, but she also has your heart. When she finds someone worthy of it, she will know, and she will take that leap just like you did." "And Samuel will be fine," Owen assured her. "He knows what he wants and he is going after it. He will make a good veterinarian and he will come back to the valley eventually. This place has a way of pulling people back." Grace nodded, reassured by Owen's confidence in their children. They had raised them well, taught them values and skills, given them both roots and wings. Whatever paths they chose, they would have the foundation to succeed. As 1900 dawned, the Jameson Ranch entered a new century on solid footing. The horse breeding program was nationally recognized, with buyers coming from as far as California and Texas to purchase Owen's horses. The cattle operation was profitable and well managed. And the family was strong, bound together by love and shared purpose. In the spring of 1901, Ruth surprised everyone by announcing her engagement to a schoolteacher from Denver named Marcus Wright. He was a quiet, intelligent man who treated Ruth as an equal and supported her ambitions. Owen and Grace gave their blessing enthusiastically, happy to see Ruth find someone who appreciated her for who she was. Samuel graduated from veterinary school that same year, and as Owen had predicted, returned to Alamosa to establish a practice. His expertise was immediately in demand, and he quickly became an invaluable resource for ranchers throughout the valley. Henry and Catherine welcomed their first child in the fall of 1901, a daughter they named Grace, after her grandmother. Holding her namesake in her arms for the first time, Grace Jameson felt a profound sense of continuity, of the family line extending forward into the future, carrying with it the values and stories that had defined the previous generation. "Your great-grandmother would have loved to meet you," Grace whispered to the baby. "And my father, your great-great-grandfather, would have been so proud of this family. I wish they could see what we have built here." "They see," Owen said, standing beside her and looking down at his granddaughter with wonder. "Somehow, somewhere they see, and they are proud." In 1905, Grace and Owen celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. It was a quiet celebration, just the two of them, riding out to the hill where Willow was buried and spending the afternoon remembering their journey together. 26 years, Grace marveled. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you pulled me out of that snowstorm. Other times it feels like we have been together forever." "Both are true," Owen said. "Time is strange that way. The years pass quickly, but they also fill up with so much living that they feel infinite." "You have any regrets?" Grace asked. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Owen considered the question seriously, then shook his head. "No, not a single one. Every decision we made led us here to this moment, to this life. Even the mistakes, and we have made our share, were part of the journey. I would not change anything." "Neither would I," Grace agreed. "Though I will admit, there were moments when I wondered if we would make it. The first few years were so hard, and there were times when I was not sure we would survive." "But we did," Owen reminded her. "Because we had each other, because we refused to give up, because we believed in what we were building." They sat together on the hill as the sun began to set, watching the ranch spread out below them, the house and barns and pastures that represented decades of work and sacrifice and love. Two of their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter drifting up on the evening breeze. Henry was working with a young horse in the corral, his movements echoing his father's techniques. Ruth and Marcus were visiting, their wagon visible on the road leading to the house. "This is what matters," Grace said softly. "Not the money or the reputation or the success. This, family, love, the life we have built together, this is what lasts. This is what we will leave behind," Owen agreed. "Long after we are gone, this ranch will still be here, and our children and grandchildren will remember the story of how it began. They will tell their children about the snowstorm and the dying mare and the cowboy who gave away his best horse to a stranger. And maybe, if we are very lucky, they will understand what it all meant." "What did it mean?" Grace asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "It meant that kindness matters," Owen said. "That we are all connected, that what we do for others ripples outward in ways we cannot always predict or control. It meant that love is a choice we make every day, not just a feeling we fall into. And it meant that sometimes, in our darkest moments, we are exactly where we need to be to find our way to the light." Grace leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. 26 years, and she loved him more now than she had thought possible all those years ago when he had first taken her hand and offered her partnership. "Thank you," she said, as she had said so many times before, "for finding me, for saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you," Owen replied, "for saying yes, for trusting me, for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy with a half-built dream, for making my life infinitely richer than I ever imagined it could be." They remained on the hill until the stars came out, talking and remembering and planning for the future that still stretched ahead of them. They had built something lasting, something meaningful, something that would endure long after they were gone. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness in a snowstorm, a cowboy giving his best mare to a stranger and saying, "She is yours forever." Forever had turned out to be longer and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of a growing family. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch house with noise and laughter. Henry and Catherine had 3 more children, while Ruth and Marcus had 2. Samuel eventually married a young woman he met through his veterinary practice, and they added 3 more grandchildren to the Jameson clan. Owen and Grace grew older gracefully, their bodies slowing down but their spirits remaining strong. They handed over more and more of the daily operations to Henry and Catherine, but remained active and involved, offering advice and support when needed. They had become the patriarch and matriarch of not just their family, but of the ranching community in the valley, respected for their skill, their integrity, and the obvious love they shared. In the summer of 1912, Alamosa held a celebration for its 50th anniversary as an incorporated town. Owen and Grace were honored guests, recognized for their contributions to the community. As part of the celebration, Grace was asked to speak about the early days and what had brought her to Alamosa. Standing before the assembled crowd, Grace felt nervous but also proud. She told the story of that day in January 1879, of losing her mare to a mountain lion, of weeping in the snow, of the cowboy who had appeared out of the blizzard and changed her life forever. She told them about Willow, about Owen's extraordinary generosity, about falling in love and building a life together. "I came to this valley with nothing," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "Less than nothing. I had lost everything I had ever known, and I was certain my life was over. But because one man chose kindness over convenience, because he saw someone in need and responded with generosity rather than indifference, everything changed. Not just for me, but for our children and grandchildren, for everyone whose lives have been touched by the ranch we built together." She paused, looking out at the faces watching her, some familiar, some new, all part of the community that had become her home. "I tell you this story not to praise my husband, though he deserves all the praise I can give him. I tell you this story because it illustrates a truth we sometimes forget, that our actions matter, that kindness is never wasted, that what we do for others, even strangers, can have consequences that ripple outward far beyond what we can see or imagine." She found Owen in the crowd, his eyes on her, his face reflecting pride and love. 33 years ago, a cowboy gave me his best mare and said she was mine forever. That mare gave me time to find my way, time to fall in love, time to build a life. And through that life, I have learned that forever is not just about duration. It is about impact. It is about creating something that lasts beyond our individual lives. It is about paying forward the kindness we receive, multiplying it, sharing it, making it part of who we are and what we leave behind. The crowd applauded, and Grace stepped down from the platform, slightly embarrassed by the attention but also glad that she had told the story. It was important that people understood where they had come from, what values had built this community, what made it special. That evening, as they rode home together in the wagon, Owen reached over and took her hand. "That was a beautiful speech. I meant every word," Grace said. "Do you realize how many lives you changed that day in the snow? Not just mine, but our children's, our grandchildren's, all the people who have worked for us over the years, all the families who have bought horses from us, everyone we have touched in some way. All of that traces back to your decision to give me Willow." "Our decision," Owen corrected. "Everything we have built, we built together. I may have started it with a single act, but you turned it into something meaningful. You gave it purpose and direction. You made it matter." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. Then Grace said, "I am tired, Owen. Not unhappy, just tired. I think I am ready to slow down even more, to spend more time just enjoying what we have rather than always working toward the next goal." "Then that is what we will do," Owen agreed. "Henry and Catherine can handle the ranch. They do not need us hovering over them anymore. It is time for us to simply enjoy the fruits of our labor." And that was what they did. Over the next few years, Owen and Grace gradually stepped back from active ranch management, giving Henry and Catherine full control. They spent their days doing the things they enjoyed: riding through the valley, visiting with grandchildren, working in the garden Grace had always wanted but never had time to maintain properly, traveling occasionally to see Samuel or Ruth. They grew old together, their bodies betraying them in small ways but their love never diminishing. When Grace's arthritis made it difficult for her to do fine handwork, Owen learned to help with mending. When Owen's hearing began to fail, Grace made sure to always sit close enough that he could hear her. They adapted, adjusted, and continued forward together as they always had. In the spring of 1920, as they approached their 41st wedding anniversary, Owen became ill. It started as a simple cough, but quickly developed into pneumonia. Despite Samuel's best efforts and the care of a doctor brought from Denver, Owen's condition worsened. He was 83 years old, and his body no longer had the strength to fight. Grace stayed by his side day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, reminiscing about their life together. The family gathered, everyone understanding that they were facing the end. On a quiet afternoon in April, with Grace beside him and his children and grandchildren nearby, Owen opened his eyes and looked at his wife. "Grace," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "My Grace, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for the best 41 years of my life." "Thank you for finding me," Grace replied, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you for giving me Willow. Thank you for giving me everything." "Love you," Owen whispered. "Forever." "Forever," Grace confirmed, leaning down to kiss him one last time. Owen smiled, squeezed her hand, and was gone. The grief was overwhelming, a physical ache that Grace thought might actually kill her. For 41 years, Owen had been her partner, her love, her best friend. The world felt empty without him in it, but she was not alone in her grief. Her children rallied around her, supporting her, sharing their own pain and memories. The grandchildren, some of whom had never known a world without their grandfather, struggled to understand and accept his absence. They buried Owen next to Willow on the hill overlooking the ranch, in the spot he had always loved best. The whole valley turned out for the funeral, testimony to the respect and affection Owen had earned over his lifetime. Grace stood by the grave, surrounded by her family, and felt both the weight of her loss and the consolation of knowing that Owen's legacy would live on. In the months that followed, Grace slowly found her way forward. She would never stop missing Owen, never stop wishing she could share just one more sunrise with him, but she also knew that he would want her to keep living, to keep enjoying the family and the ranch they had built together. She moved into the main house with Henry and Catherine, giving up the smaller house she and Owen had moved to when they retired. She spent her days with the grandchildren, teaching them the skills and values that Owen had lived by, making sure they understood where they came from and what it meant. On what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, Grace made the journey to Owen's grave alone, carrying wildflowers she had picked from the valley. She sat beside the grave marker, talking to him as if he were still there, telling him about the grandchildren's accomplishments, about Henry's latest breeding success, about Ruth's promotion to school superintendent, about Samuel's growing reputation as the best veterinarian in southern Colorado. "We did well, did we not?" she said to the silent grave. "Look at what came from that day in the snow. Look at all the lives we touched, all the love we created. You were right, Owen, it all mattered. Every bit of it mattered." She placed the flowers on the grave and stood, her body protesting the movement, reminding her that she too was growing old. But she was not ready to join Owen yet. She had promised him she would see their great-grandchildren, and she intended to keep that promise. Grace lived for another 4 years, long enough to see 2 great-grandchildren born and to witness Henry establish the Jameson Ranch as one of the premier horse breeding operations in the western United States. She died peacefully in her sleep in August 1924, surrounded by family at the age of 67. They buried her beside Owen, and on her marker they carved the words she had asked for. She wept in the snow, and love found her. The Jameson Ranch continued for generations, always in family hands, always maintaining the values that Owen and Grace had established. The story of the cowboy and the dying horse, of an act of kindness in a blizzard that became a love story and then a legacy, was passed down through the family, told to each new generation so they would understand where they came from. And in every stall and every barn on the Jameson Ranch, there hung a plaque with the same inscription, "Pay it forward." It was a reminder of the debt that could never be fully repaid, only passed on to others in need. A reminder that kindness mattered, that generosity changed lives, that sometimes the most important thing you could do was help a stranger in distress. The story of Grace Vaughn and Owen Jameson became part of the fabric of Alamosa, a tale told around firesides and at town celebrations, an example of how tragedy could transform into triumph, how a single moment of compassion could echo through decades. It was a reminder that love was not just about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about showing up in someone's darkest hour and offering them not just survival but hope. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when bodies wear out, Owen and Grace were together again, riding through eternal fields on 2 horses, one a sturdy gelding and one a dappled gray mare named Willow, the animal whose gift had started everything, forever preserved in the story of a cowboy who gave away his best mare to a stranger and said, "She is yours forever," and meant it with every fiber of his being. Their love had been tested by hardship, strengthened by partnership, and made eternal by the family and legacy they left behind. It was a love story for the ages, born in a Colorado blizzard and enduring long after the snows of that distant winter had melted away. And at its heart was a simple truth, that kindness, generosity, and love were the most powerful forces in the world, capable of transforming lives, building legacies, and creating forever from a single moment of compassion in the snow.